Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Athlete Climate Academy. And today I'm here with an athlete that has been doing a lot of actions for himself, but also to advocate for the problems of climate change, of biodiversity. And probably if you have been running for long, you know him. He's been out in the game for many years. Probably we started running internationally, kind of at the same time, in the early 2000s. It's a pleasure to have with all of us today Andy Symonds. He's originally from the UK, but living now in France. So first of all, Andy, how are you doing? Thanks for coming.
Yeah, hi Kilian. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast. Doing pretty well, keeping busy on all fronts, sport, work and play, and the sun's shining. So yeah, pretty good so far. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and as I mentioned, you have been in the game for long. And first question, it would be have you seen a lot of changes in the sport, in trail running, and also in how trail running it's been changing regarding to the environment? I think it's a sport that we practice because we love nature, and athletes probably are connected to that. But the sport itself, the model, it's maybe not the most sustainable. Do you think it's something that it's been always there, and it's us that we have been changing the way to look at the sport, or is something that is the sport that has been changing?
A big question. I think there is a lot of change in the world on all fronts, and as you say, almost an old man now, because we've been running together since the years 2000, but actually started running in the 1990s probably. I was just watching the European Athletics Championships, cross country championships, and I can remember doing those kind of races in the mid 90s in the mud. Loads of change. So I started running cross country, fell running, then I moved to France 13 years ago, and I got into sort of trail running and ultra trail running. And I've always run just for the pleasure of getting out and breathing and, getting muddy basically and feeling good about it. And what I really noticed is what's happened in the last sort of 10-ish years, I think. It's probably pretty much since I've been in France. When I came to France, I initially joined the Solomon international running team. It was starting to get a little bit professional. Obviously, you were making a bit of money at that time, and we were starting to have, medium, smallish contracts where we're getting a bit of money, but you couldn't really make your living off of it. So people were running for the pure pleasure. Whereas now it's, more and more athletes in France, but also just across the world are actually making a living out of it. So that's a major change. And with that change, there's the kind of requirements from the sponsor's point of view as to what they think you should be doing in terms of how you're kind of imaging yourself and the kind of the noise you're making and what you're talking about. So it's gone, what I feel now is trail running, but it's the case for a lot of sports, right? Is that the athletes they're so much more than just athletes in terms of what they can do and the responsibilities that go with them. If you'd asked me this question maybe 10 or 15 years ago, should athletics and politics kind of be mixed? And I was like, no way, an athlete just shouldn't get involved in that. It's a different subject. But now when, big name athletes, trail runners or anything, they've got so much influence power that the things have to be mixed, because what an athlete does and says and the stuff that the athlete puts on various networks is kind of followed by so many people that it has a big impact. So there's the athletes that are doing that, and there's also the organizers of races, which can kind of shape the way the sport is developing, but also shape the way that people kind of live their lives a little bit, because we can associate things, whatever it is, models of life and ways of life with sport. So it becomes like such a bigger thing. So that's I guess that's the major change I've seen over the year. It's a good thing that it's getting more popular and people are talking about it more, but there's a real danger there, I think, with associating basically the wider economic model with something which is just sport. And sport, for me, it's running. It's like the ultimate healthy way of life, and we should totally be promoting running. If you want to promote the kind of the simplest, less impactful form of running, you just say everyone's go out barefoot running, right? Because it's good for your health. It's good for the environment because you're not consuming anything. And you say, let's barefoot run around your garden and up the hills behind your house if you've got some nice hills behind your house. And then you can go a little bit further than that, because obviously to run a decent amount, you do need trainers. I mean, I do know people that do run barefoot, but it's pretty rare, right? And your feet do get torn up pretty quickly. So I think, using some trainers and using some equipment is kind of good and necessary. But obviously, there's an impact associated with that. But there's an impact associated with absolutely everything we do, right? Every kind of action and decision and choice we make on a daily basis is my immediate impact on maybe my well-being and how I feel and how good I feel. There's also a wider impact on other people, and there's also the impact on what's happening in the longer term. So we need to really be weighing these things up. And a pair of shoes, okay, the positive impact for me is I can run better. It feels good. I'm not smashing my feet up. But then obviously if I'm using hundreds of pairs of shoes, then the wider long-term impact is we're consuming lots of materials, we're using lots of energy to make those shoes and transporting them around the world. So let's run with shoes, but maybe let's not use hundreds. But then if we maybe take that to the next level, and we're talking about on the networks notably, and also which races we're going to, then the much bigger impact is what races we do and how we get there. Because at the end of the day, the climate crisis is basically a fossil fuel crisis, right? And what emits lots of fossil fuels? It's traveling, mainly. In France, it's at least a third of the carbon footprint is travel. So just transporting things and then people flying and driving around the place. So if there's one place where we can make a big, big impact, it really is the travel aspect of our lives, whether it's to do with sports or something else. So now I feel there's a kind of a real, and it's new. It's a bit newish for me, and it's new for lots of people because we're learning on the go. But now the evidence is really out there, and it really is in your face that if there's one thing you can do to reduce your personal impact on the destruction of the planet, basically, it's cutting down on flying and driving, because they are the big emitters, right? And I've spent some time this year calculating how that weighs up.
Yeah, I see that you are one of the few athletes that they are calculating the carbon footprint and publishing it, and I think that's very interesting, and it's very healthy also, like for showing how is our impact as for racing, for running, for going around. And I remember it was a couple of years ago you made a big statement like on not traveling to Thailand for the World Championships. Like you could go there and compete, and like knowing your level, like you had chances of like getting a medal on a race, on a World Championship, and you decided not to go. And I think you can explain better, but I think it was more like about the impact of going to Thailand for racing.
Yeah, I mean, basically, when I got selected for that race, it was at the same time that I'd first calculated my own individual carbon footprint. And I'd seriously encourage everyone to do this, because I think it was a bit of a step change in my own thinking and my own kind of decision making from then. It was actually quite recent. We're only talking about a couple of years ago. I'm always kind of conscious about the environment, but it was only at that time when I actually did some sort of number calculations, and there's loads of tools online to do this, that I actually kind of realize how heavily weighted flying is. So you don't have to fly very far to kind of double or triple your carbon footprint. And so I got this offer to go to Thailand for the World Championships there, and I just calculated my annual carbon footprint. I think it was around 6 tons that year, and I realized it was going to add maybe another 4 tons. So it was like not quite doubling, but adding another, say, 60% to my annual carbon footprint, and it was taking it way above what we should be individually really aiming for. So for me, I mean, it wasn't that difficult decision. It just felt logical that I just shouldn't be doing this. And there's always so many opportunities to do races. Obviously, the World Champs is a big one, but it just felt disconnected from my own personal logic, actually, to say, I'm making an effort to do things positively for the planet, and yes, I'm happy to just jump on the plane for 10 hours. So it came down to kind of quite a logical decision for me. And actually, that comes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about the roles now of sports people is whether we like it or not is more than just aiming for medals and getting good times, because anyone who's got I call them antisocial networks, then with people following them, then what's going to happen is you've got quite a high chance you're going to influence maybe people's decisions. And I think if there's one thing we can do with these antisocial networks, is at least attempt to share nice information and encourage people in a direction that we think is probably positive for the wider society. So that felt for me, all right, well, let's maybe make this logical decision, not go there. And if we're not going to go there, then yeah, let's at least talk about it and share the idea, because hopefully it might get other people thinking a little bit about, oh yeah, well, actually, if you do fly on the plane for 10 hours, then it is a few tons of carbon. That is pretty bad for the world. It's going to double, or it's going to add 50% to my annual carbon footprint. Yeah, let's think about that, and let's maybe not do it, or let's do it less often, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I like you mentioned this role of athletes, that it's I was at the same point at some point, like it's I just want to race and perform, and that's my job. Like I shouldn't get into other things because I don't have the knowledge or the right to talk about other subjects. But as you mentioned, like athletes are followed, and we should use this platform we have, every one of us, like to share on more like global subjects and subjects that at the end of the day they impact us and they touch us. And often when I talk with athletes, one of the hardest thing is like how to feel confident, and how to feel that that you can say things, that you can, even if our lifestyle is not the most sustainable, because as you mentioned, like we are using goods for running, we are using some equipment, we are traveling, like even if it's to local races, like we are having an impact as most of the people. And somehow many athletes feel, if it's a lot of criticism when like athletes talk about those subjects. Even now, I think it was a World Cup, and some skiers they were talking about like that it was not logical to race like only on like artificial snow and like in a glacier that they were exploiting just for doing the race, and they get a lot of criticism about like, but you are like traveling to other races and blah, blah. So like to try to not get afraid of speaking out. And I think you find a very, like, besides that, you are probably one of the ones that do the best job on like minimizing your carbon footprint. Like you talk in your social media, and when you go to races, I have been seeing that you show up like on some funny ways, that you use a lot of like drawing and humor to communicate about those topics. And I think it's brilliant. Like it's a way that it's not heavy. Like often when we talk about climate change, it's like very negative on a way. It's very like, it's pretty disturbing of like projecting ourselves like on, okay, what's going on in the future. But the way that you do with humor, I think it's a much more lighter way that probably it arrives more to the people. Why did you started to use that, and what was your thought on that? Yeah.
Well, I've always been a fan of Monty Python to start with. No, I mean, well, if you come back to climate, I mean, basically, there's a lot of scope for getting seriously depressed and stressed and angry, right? You can get up every morning, read the news if you like. You can look at wars, but you can also look at the planet and see that it's pretty dire. We're aiming for not more than 1.5 degree rise. We've already hit 1.2, and we're probably going to hit 1.5 pretty quickly, and it's probably going to go way beyond that. So you could get into this spiral of thought, thinking, oh, geez, we're going to get 3 or 4 degrees rise. There's going to be all these countries that are going to get wiped out. And then you can just get all depressed about it, right? Or very, very angry. There's probably a lot of truth in all those facts, but there's probably not a lot of value to be added personally or wider by just getting angry, right? Because we've got to enjoy our lives. That's kind of number one priority, I think, for everybody is how to just smile and feel good and enjoy our lives. So the first thing I'd recommend is not to get too angry about it, even though we might have our moments. And I think, humor can be quite a good way of kind of sharing information and not feeling too bad about something which is quite catastrophic. So it's a good way maybe of carrying messages, and it kind of fits my personal rules. If you're sticking stuff on the antisocial network, it needs to be either funny or informative or inspiring. It's kind of my general-ish rules. There's not too much basically crap out there, which there is a lot of, but let's try and at least make people smile. or give them some nice information which they don't know, share some nice ideas, or maybe inform them or inspire them about something. So yeah, that's kind of why humor is for me a very important part of every minute almost of my life. Otherwise, I'd just be depressed.
Yeah, no, and I invite everyone like to go to look to your anti-social media channels, because like it's really like on as I mentioned, like how you approach these problems, and is to get information on a way that probably it's making us smile, and realizing also like that we are part of the problem, but we can be also part of the solution with our change. And
well, yeah, I mean that's really key, because there's obviously, you could get depressed, but actually we've got all the tools in hand. When I say we, the human race has got all the tools and power in hand to completely destroy the planet, and that's kind of what we're doing quite a good job at going towards that route right now. But we've also got all the tools and all the power, if we want it, to live amazing lives and happy lives and healthy lives, because all the technology is there to stop destroying the planet. What do we need to do? We just need to stop using fossil fuels, mainly. There's lots of other stuff we can do as well, but the big one is to stop using fossil fuels. And then we can actually all be quite healthy, happy, and live good lives without all these kind of natural disasters and the rest of it impacting us or our friends and family, and or other people in different places. So I think we need to always remind ourselves that the tools are there, and let's try and, if we've got a bit of a following on these networks, then let's try and use that a little bit to share some information and some ideas as to how we might adopt these technologies and not keep using the ones which are destructive. Which I always come back to the same thing. It mainly comes down to cars and planes.
Yeah, and we've been talking a bit about how you started to calculate your footprint, to understand what was your impact, and how you are using your platform, your voice, to raise awareness about the problem, and also like solutions that they are there. And also like I just saw that recently you posted like you have been calculating the footprint of this year's races, and that you will do a compensation about that. Like practically, what would you say to athletes that they want to calculate and to compensate their footprint? Like what are the ways? Like I think first, like reduce it. No, like probably like the first thing of like calculating is that you understand where you can cut things. But then like all those emissions that that we have because we can't cut. What is your approach there? Like it's how to compensate, to how to do
it? There's a rule that they have in France, and I use this with work actually, because I develop renewable energy projects in France. That's my day job. And there's a general kind of French environmental rule, which is ERC, éviter, réduire, compenser. So avoid, reduce, and then compensate. And I think this we should all be applying this rule kind of across the board, really. So the first thing, the most important thing to do really is to avoid the emissions in the first place. You just avoid taking the car if you can, or taking that flight if you can. If you can't, because it's too important or it's pretty much unavoidable, then at least reduce. So maybe try and reduce the number of flights or the number of drives or the distance we're going. And then kind of the last thing you can do once you have avoided and reduced is to compensate. I mean, we'd be lying to say you can compensate all our emissions, because you can't. There are some nice compensation ideas out there, but at the end of the day, there's no way that we could possibly compensate all the emissions that everyone's producing right now. We can plant some trees. It's a good thing, but it shouldn't be seen as an excuse, and that's exactly what the oil producers are using it as. So the oil states and the big companies which sell petrol in petrol stations, they're saying, just it doesn't matter, just compensate. So and we really need to avoid that, because it's almost an excuse for carrying on using fuel, right? If you just say I'm going to plant 2 trees every time I drive to the supermarket to buy some rubbish, so we really need to focus on the avoiding and the reducing to start with. I got a nice email yesterday from the SNCF, so the French Transport, public transport, well, not public, sorry, French train network, which I use a lot through, well, to go to races, but also through work. And at the end of every year now, you get an email from them, which I got yesterday, saying how many kilometers I'd done. So I did 35,000 kilometers in the train. And it kind of made me realize, because like 35,000 kilometers in the train, it's like less than 200 kilograms of carbon. So, okay, it's some carbon, but it's not a lot. If I'd done the same driving, it would be 5 to 6 tons of carbon. So that's a good example of maybe avoiding the car, reducing, and then I've still got a bit of a carbon footprint, which I can maybe compensate, but it's at least trying to avoid and to reduce in a first instance. Yeah, well, I suppose the fossil fuel one is the big one they're trying to plug now is carbon capture and storage, which is, to be honest, pretty much bullshit, because it's vacuuming the air to get out. It works, but it works at a very small scale, and it requires a humongous amount of energy, because there's actually not much carbon in the air. So you have to suck all this air through to get a tiny bit of carbon to pull it out. And if you're to do that to compensate or to kind of reverse and avoid all the carbon that everyone's emitting in the world, you just need to cover, huge land areas with these massive energy intensive machines, which are basically vacuum cleaners. So yeah.
Yeah, it feels like, we put we like to put the focus on the tech solutions, as you mentioned, it's compensation methods that we need them right now, because we are beyond any point of we need all the solutions there. But first we need to focus on the first two, that avoiding and reducing, totally. To changing our we need to change our way to live, our way to do things, our way to transport ourselves, and to all the consumption. We need to change first that, and then just when it's some residual emissions, then we can compensate, but not the other way around. Which it seems exactly. That it's more the trend. And you mentioned just before that you are working on renewable energy. So what? We know you very well as a runner. We know you also as an activist, with all you do. But what is your job, and how? It's some things there that you learn towards the running career, or how we can use on our daily lives.
Definitely, I see a lot of parallels more and more. I've actually been working in renewable energy all my working life, which is quite a long time now. I'm afraid to say it's 18 years I've been working in kind of professional businesses. And I studied civil engineering actually at Bristol University a long time ago. And I thought, it'd be nice to build and design football stadiums and athletic stadiums, because they're quite pretty, really, aren't they, when they're nicely done? But I quickly changed my mind and started working in renewable energy in 2004 in New Zealand. I worked in dam surveillance and wind farm development there. And then for 5 or 6 years, I worked in Scotland in some of the early onshore wind projects. And since now 2011, I've been working in France on wind farms, solar farms, and more recently on battery energy storage. So I co-founded a French subsidiary of a British company called Harmony Energy in France nearly 2 years ago now. And we're developing two technologies mainly. So it's solar farms to produce what is now very cheap and very clean electricity, because solar panels are, just an easy technology now. It's quite simple, really. The sun shines on them. They make electrons move backwards and forwards, forwards mainly. And then we convert it into alternating current, and we have electricity in our homes and across the network, basically. So we're working on lots of projects across France, developing these solar farms. And at the same time, as we integrate more and more renewable energy into our systems, no matter what country it is, we're actually integrating very cheap and very clean electricity, obviously. But one of the downsides is it's not controllable. So the wind either blows or it doesn't, or the sun is either shining or it's not. So it's not something we can control manually like we can maybe a coal-fired power station or a gas-fired power station. So we need to build in some flexibility into the electricity system at the same time. So we can have flexibility at home, where we have kind of maybe a signal, either a price signal or a power signal, which says, look, there's not enough wind blowing right now. You need to turn your lights off, or you maybe not heat the house or heat the water at that time. And that's something where there's a huge scope with kind of smart grids to incentivize and encourage people at home, and industries as well, obviously, to use electricity when when it's free and pretty much free or very cheap and abundant in renewable low carbon forms. Then the other way, because we're doing this at such a big scale, because electricity, is massive across every country, we also need some flexibility in the grid itself. So we're developing battery energy storage projects. So it's basically ways of absorbing electricity when we've got almost too much of it on the network, which is more and more, it's the middle of the day in the summer because that's when the sun's shining. And then in the evening, when the sun's maybe set and people have gone home and they're turning on their heating or turning on the ovens or whatever, then we can use these battery energy storage projects to re-inject that electricity onto the network. So it's accompanying really the integration of renewable energies across the network, which is absolutely essential for us to be able to integrate all this electricity. What we need to remember is that even France, we think of France as a very low carbon energy system, and it has got a very low carbon electricity system because it's 70% nuclear. Whether you're a fan of nuclear or not, I personally am not, but whether you are or you're not, it is low carbon, right? Yeah. So there's not much carbon like you would associate with gas and coal-fired power stations. But actually, it's only like 25% of the energy consumed in a country, in France in any case, and that's probably fairly typical. And actually, 2/3, 65%, something like that, of the energy consumed is actually from fossil fuels. So a lot of that is cars driving, but it's also kind of oil-fired heaters at homes and then gas and oil used in industries as well. So yeah, we've got low carbon electricity in France, but we've actually got quite a high carbon. Well, 2/3 of the energy is carbon intensive. So what France and every other country need to do right now is replace that fossil fuel energy in the system with we need to reduce it to start with by using less, but we need to replace a lot of it with electricity, which is why we're going towards electric vehicles, which is why we're using more electric systems in our heating systems. So heat pumps, for example, at homes rather than oil burners and the rest of it. So there's a lot of movement happening in the energy system, and there's going to be a lot more need for more electricity, and that electricity needs to be, if we're making more electricity, it needs to be green, and if we're bringing more green and renewable electricity into the network, we need to be more flexible about the way we use it, about the way we kind of transport it across the network. So that's my day job, and I think there are quite a few parallels with the running world as well. But it maybe makes me think about the whole subject a little bit more than it might do if I was just a pure 100% professional runner who was maybe less involved on a daily basis, less kind of aware, I suppose, of these problems that we're facing and trying to deal with on a national and international level.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting on how we need to change. Of course, electricity should be renewable, across the country, but then you need to electrify all the country. I think living in Norway now, it's, besides all the hypocrisy and all the things that they have with the petrol, the energy systems in the country are pretty good. It's not sun, it's not. Yeah, it's I think the country is 99% electricity comes from the hydro, and cars it's we see most of the cars that you see already now, they are electric, but because the network of charges, it's very, very, it's everywhere. It's very easy to charge. You don't need to think much. And remember, I was traveling down to even Sweden. Right now I'm in Sweden. Is you need to think much, much more to charge, and where it's possible to charge, and where you find. And France, it's the same. So how you need to make change all the systems so it's easier, and that comes for particulates, but also I think for industry, from when you think about trucks, when you think about transportation. So it needs to be not only renewables, as you mentioned, but I think to have all the batteries to storage energy, it's huge, and it needs to be more and more
very important,
present, and then just to change all the systems. But as you mentioned at the beginning, also first avoiding and reducing. So
exactly, I think that's
we've all got the first point.
It's not going to be easy. I mean, we've all got to make efforts in this, but then there's obviously some efforts which are easy and some are more difficult. But if we're going towards electric cars at the moment, we've just recently bought a Renault Zoe, because we live in France, you have to buy a Renault car, right? But it's if you want to drive a long way. We don't very often drive a long way, but sometimes we might take a 5 or 6 hour drive to go see some relatives or do a race. And it's a bit of a hassle, I guess, because you have to plan your journey. You have to maybe stop when you don't want to and stop for longer. And sometimes you might run low and the battery charge is no good. But these are the kind of, we're gonna have to make a bit of an effort, right? Because otherwise, if it's just too easy to keep using fossil fuels, and that's no good. So it's just about being a little bit aware of, okay, maybe we need to make a bit of an effort, but actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's probably worth making that effort because we're basically stuffing up the world a bit less. So I think it's probably quite worth not stuffing up the world too much. And if we're aware that taking a flight or driving a petrol car a long way is quite a fast way of stuffing up the world, then for me it really brings home that weight that you need to put into your argument when you're weighing up in your own mind, or with your family or your girlfriend or your wife, whatever it might be, or husband. How should we get there? Should we go there in the first place? How many times should we go there, and how should we get there? It needs to be weighed up against the impact of your choice that it will have on the world, which is generally negative if it involves getting in a car or a plane.
Yeah,
which is
And that it can relate to races too, in the way that and you come from like a UK where it's like fair running. They are like pretty like local and very like low key races, but it's a lot of races. Every village have its own race, and it's probably the footprint of the event. It's very low because it's just like, okay, you get a BP view and then just run up and down or like whatever it is. It's not like a big fanfare around. And now like in France probably it's kind of the opposite. Like it's all the events like try to make like a big thing of it. And I think like now the model you mentioned is a lot of traveling because you want to follow circuits or things like it's a lot of transportation around. But on a way like and I feel like in the last years I have been doing much more local races and just moving for some big races. But like change at the beginning, it's hard to change that mentality of saying, okay, I'm missing out things, but after when you get used, it's like, no, you are like enjoying much more like the local community, the local races. You are enjoying more like the time like training home doing projects. So I think it's not about like renouncing to things, but it's to changing the way to do things. I think it's not about like it's like when we talk about decreasing, I don't know how it's in English, like the croissants.
Degrowth.
Degrowth. When we talk about degrowth, it's often like seen very negative and like just saying like, okay, we are back to the covers. And it's not like you are working on renewable energies, which is like technologies to give like probably like also more, as you mentioned, it's cheaper the energy. So at the end, it's good for like social justice. It's good for like energy, like people to have energy. So it's not only about reducing, is not about like renouncing, but it's just to make a different future.
Totally, yeah. Well, big subject, growth and degrowth. I think the word is, I haven't thought of what the correct one would be, but the word is a bit problematic to start with because we talk about growth, but when we say growth, we generally mean, unfortunately now we mean economic growth. And we can't disconnect, unfortunately, it's been pretty much proven black and white now that we can't disconnect economic growth with climatic destruction, because there's two associated. If we keep growing, as in what is growing? Growing actually in financial economic terms is basically putting more money through the cash machine every day. So the way for a company to grow its GDP is basically to flow more money through the system. And it's impossible to keep throwing more and more money through the system without destroying the climate. So there's definitely, we need to look at that differently. And I think the first thing we need to do is we really need to separate our ambitions from this kind of economic growth strategy. I think we can, maybe there's a better word, but we can talk about growth, but we should be talking about like happiness growth or welfare growth or wellness growth. Or no, sporting growth.
I think just like when you think about like, I think it goes like a lot on like what are the goals is growing, but growing it always like it's growing the
wrong thing, right?
The wrong thing. Like you can grow like social justice. You can grow like
Exactly.
the
Yeah, good example.
the like when talk to products is like grow the recycling or grow the part that it's good, whatever, like, but to put at the same like level of growth, like the quality, like it's I'm with you that the growth it's a bad wording for what it is, that it's about changing the system for better, like it's
Totally. Yeah, I think it's one of the we're relying on politicians, and politicians get there by electing, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to inspire the right people, because we could do with some politicians and some kind of leaders who kind of think about this, and maybe in the sort of the same way we're discussing right now. So there are some examples. I think Bhutan's an example. New Zealand's now looking at happiness indexes rather than just GDP. So there are some examples of what we can do. But what I think to come back to sport, I think it's always a bit sad when we kind of mix the two, and sporting competitions or events become less of a sporting event, but more of a kind of economic growth exercise. And it's the case for lots of anything really, but football World Cups is a pretty bad example of where the main thing is how much money we can get through, how the advertising is going to generate cash. But yeah, particularly come back to trail running, as you said, fell running. I was brought up in this world where fell running, you might drive 10 or 20 miles, then you might pay like a couple of pounds for the non-Brits, and you do your 20, 30, 40 minute or an hour race up and down some wet, muddy hill. You get back, you have a pint and a pie maybe, and then you go home. And so running was really about the event. It was definitely not about the economic model. So I've always been a little bit in that mindset. It was a bit of a surprise when I came to France, even in 2011, to realize, oh wow, there's like 4 or 5 different trail running magazines. You don't get these in the UK. There's like an annual fell running magazine maybe, but you have to subscribe. But in France, the trail runner mag, and there's all these different ones. It's like, well, there's actually a bit of money in this, and people are making money out of it. But then unfortunately, the more we go that way, it seems that we kind of go down this slippery slope towards prioritizing economic growth, so basically money flow, over kind of the enjoyment of the sport and maybe the environment itself. So yeah, I mean, you obviously saw and followed and were involved a little bit in this debate we had over the summer about one of the examples. There's many World Series now, but the UTMB World Series, which is kind of definitely in a growth mindset, because we're churning more and more cash through the system. We're trying to make more races. We're bringing in sponsors, and it seems that we really are in a kind of dynamic towards cash flow growth, maybe more than environmental sustainability, and growing a kind of a promotion of a healthy lifestyle and social justice, as you mentioned before.
Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you very much for your time. Like, it's been very enlightening. I think people can get very inspired by what you do, like not only what you say, but also what you do. That you are really one of the athletes that you walk your talk, and that's very inspiring. And I invite everyone to follow Andy in his anti-social medias, as he says, to get more information and to share his journey. And hope we meet in some race soon, and we can keep discussing on those topics.
Yeah, hope to meet there on the train, Kilian. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for your time. It was an enjoyable conversation, and I hope to see you sometime next year.